There is an ancient proverb, Polycrates, which the philosopher Chrysippus puts not as it really is, but as he thought better. Who will praise a father except happy sons? But Dionysiodorus of Troezen corrects him and restores the true form thus: who will praise a father except unhappy sons? And he says that the proverb stops the mouths of those who, being worthless in themselves, take refuge in the virtues of certain ancestors and are forever praising them. But surely, for man in whom, to use Pindar's words, the noble spirit naturally displays itself as inherited from sires, and who, like thee, patterns his life after the fairest examples in his family line, for such men it will be good fortune to be reminded of their noblest progenitors, ever and anon hearing the story of them or telling it themselves. For it is not that they lack the noble qualities of their own, and make their reputation dependent on the praises of others. Nay, rather they associate their own careers with the careers of their great ancestors, whom they hail both as founders of their line and as the directors of their lives. And therefore, now that I have written the life of Aratus, who was thy countryman and forefather, and to whom thou thyself art no discredit in either reputation or influence, I send it to thee, not as though thou hadst not been at pains from the beginning to have the most precise knowledge of thy great ancestor's career, but in order that thy son Polycrates and Pythocles may be reared, now by hearing and now by reading, after examples in their own family line, examples which it well becomes them to imitate. For it is the lover of himself and not the lover of goodness who thinks himself always superior to others. The city of Sikyon, as soon as it had fallen away from its pure Doric form of aristocracy, which was now like a harmony dissolved, and had become a prey to factions and the ambitious schemes of demagogues, was without cease distempered and agitated, and kept changing one tyrant for another, until, after the murder of Cleon, Timocles and Cleinias were chosen chief magistrates, men of the highest repute and influence among the citizens. But no sooner did the government appear to be somewhat settled than Timocles died, and Abantidas, son of Pasias, attempting to make himself tyrant, slew Cleinias, and of the friends and kinsmen of Cleinias, banished some and killed others. He tried to kill also the son of Cleinias, Aratus, left fatherless at the age of 7. But in the confusion which prevailed about the house, the boy made his escape with the fugitives, and, wandering about in the city, full of fear and helpless, by chance got unnoticed into the house of a woman who was a sister of Abantidas, but had married Prophantus, the brother of Cleinias. Her name was Soso. This woman, who was of a noble nature, and thought it a divine dispensation that the boy had taken refuge with her, hid him in the house, and at night sent him secretly off to Argos. Thus was Aratus stolen away from the peril that threatened him, and at once that vehement and growing hatred of tyrants for which he was noted became a part of his nature, and grew with his growth. He was reared in liberal fashion among the guests and friends of his father's house at Argos, and since he saw that his bodily growth promised high health and stature, he devoted himself to the exercises of the palestra, going so far as to win wreaths of victory in contesting the pentathlon. And indeed, even his statues have plainly an athletic look, and the sagacity and magistrate of his countenance do not altogether disown the athlete's full dart and wielding of the mattock. Wherefore, His cultivation of oratory was perhaps less intense than became a man in public life, and yet he is said to have been a more ornate speaker than some think who judge from the commentaries which he left. These were a bywork, and were composed in haste, offhand, and in the words that first occurred to him in the heat of contest. Some time after the escape of Aratus, Abantidas was slain by Danias and Aristotle the logician. The tyrant was wont to attend all their public disputations in the marketplace, and to take part in them. They encouraged him in this practice, laid a plot, and took his life. Pasias also, the father of Abantidas, after assuming the supreme power, was treacherously slain by Nicocles, who then proclaimed himself tyrant. This man is said to have borne a very close resemblance to Periander, the son of Cypselus, just as Orontes the Persian did to Alcmaeon, the son of Amphiaraus, and as the Spartan youth mentioned by Myrtilus did to Hector. Myrtilus tells us, when the throng of spectators became aware of this resemblance, the youth was trampled underfoot. Nicocles was tyrant of the city for 4 months, during which he wrought the city much harm, and narrowly escaped losing it to the Aetolians when they plotted to seize it. By this time, Aratus, now a young man, was held in marked esteem on account of his high birth and of his spirit. This was showing itself to be not insignificant nor yet unenterprising, but earnest and tempered, with a judgment safe beyond his years. Wherefore the exiles from Sikyon had their minds fixed most of all upon him, and Nicocles was not neglectful of what was going on, but kept secret watch and ward over his undertakings, not because he feared any deed of so great daring and hazard as that in which Aratus finally engaged, but because he suspected that Aratus was in communication with the kings, who had been on terms of friendship and hospitality with his father. And in truth, Aratus had attempted to travel along that path, but since Antigonus neglected his promises and prolonged the time, and since the hopes derived from Egypt and Ptolemy were a long way off, he resolved to overthrow the tyrant by his own efforts. The first to whom he imparted his design were Aristomachus and Ecdalus. Of these, the one was an exile from Sikyon, and Ecdalus was an Arcadian of Megapolis, a student of philosophy, and a man of action, who had been an intimate friend of Arcesilaus the academic at Athens. These men eagerly adopted his proposals, and he then began conversations with other exiles. A few of these took part in the enterprise because they were ashamed to disappoint the hope placed in them, but the majority actually tried to stop Aratus on the ground that his inexperience made him overbold. While he was planning to seize some post in the territory of Sikyon, from which he might sally forth and make war upon the tyrant, there came to Argos a man of Sikyon, who had run away from prison. He was the brother of Casenocles, one of the exiles, and when he had been brought to Aratus by Casenocles, he told him that the part of the city's wall, over which he had climbed to safety, was almost level with the ground on the inside, where it had been attached to steep and rocky places, and that on the outside it was not at all too high for scaling ladders. When Aratus had heard this, he sent with Casenocles 2 servants of his own, Seuphas and Technon, to make an examination of the wall, for he was resolved, if he could, to hazard the whole enterprise on one secret and swift attempt, rather than in a long war and an open contest to match his private resources against those of a tyrant. So, when Casenocles and his parties came back with the measurements of the wall which they had taken, and with a report that the place was by nature not impassable nor even difficult, although they declared that it was hard to get to it undetected owing to a certain gardener's dogs, which were little beasts, but extraordinarily fierce and savage. Aratus at once undertook the business. Now the laying in of arms was nothing unusual, since almost everybody at that time indulged in robberies and predatory forays. And as for scaling ladders, Euphrano, the engineer, made them openly, since his trade screened him from suspicion, and he too was one of the exiles. As for men, each of the friends of Aratus in Argos furnished him with 10 of the few they had, and he himself equipped 30 of his own servants with arms. Through Xenophilo, the foremost of the robber captains, he also hired a few soldiers, to whom it was given out that a foray was being made into the territory of Sikyon to seize the horses of Antigonus, and most of them were sent on ahead in small bands to the power of Polygonotos, with orders to wait there. Aratus also sent on in advance Caphisias, lightly armed, with 4 companions. Their orders were to come to the gardeners when it was dark, pretending to be travellers, and after taking up quarters there for the night, to shut up him and his dogs, for there was no other way to get past them. The scaling ladders, which could be taken apart, were packed in boxes, and thus concealed were sent on ahead in wagons. In the meantime, some spies of Nicocles appeared in Argos and were reported to be secretly going about and watching the movements of Aratus. As soon as it was day, therefore, Aratus left his house and showed himself openly in the marketplace, conversing with his friends. Then he anointed himself in the gymnasium, took with him from the palestra some of the young men who were wont to drink and make holiday with him, and went back home. And after a little, one of his servants was seen carrying garlands through the marketplace, another buying light, and another talking with the women that regularly furnished music of harp and flute at banquets. When the spies saw all this, they were completely deceived, and with loud laughter said to one another, "Nothing, you see, is more timorous than a tyrant, since even Nicocles, the master of so great a city and so large a force, is in fear of a stripling, who squanders on pleasures and midday banquets the means of subsistence in exile." The spies then, thus misled, left the city, but Aratus, immediately after the morning meal, sallied forth, joined his soldiers at the tower of Polygonotos, and led them on to Nemea. Here he disclosed his design to most of them for the first time, and made his exhortations and promises. Then, after giving out as watchword, "Apollo victorious," he led them forward against Sikyon, quickening or retarding his progress according to the revolution of the moon, so as to enjoy her light while on the march, and as soon as she was setting, to be at the garden near the wall. There Caphisias came out to meet him. He had not secured the dogs, for they had bounded off before he could do this, but had locked up the gardener. Most of his men were disheartened at this, and urged Aratus to retire, but he tried to encourage them, promising to lead them back if the dogs should prove too troublesome for them. At the same time he sent forward the men who carried the scaling ladders under the command of Ecdalus and Menasipheus, while he himself followed after them slowly, the dogs already barking vigorously and running alongside the side of Ecdalus and his party. However, they reached the wall and planted their ladders against it without mishap. But as the first men were mounting the ladders, the officer who was to set the morning watch began making his rounds with a bell, and there were many lights, and the noise of the sentries coming up. The invaders, however, crouched down just where they were on the ladders, and so escaped the notice of this party without any trouble. But since another watch was coming up to meet the first, they incurred the greatest danger. However, they escaped the notice of this guard also, and it passed by, and then the leaders, Menasipheus and Ecdalus, at once mounted to the top, and after occupying the approaches to the wall on either side, sent Technon to Aratus, urging him to hasten up. Now it was no great distance from the garden to the wall, and to the tower, in which a huge dog was on the watch, a hunter. The dog himself did not notice their approach, either because he was naturally sluggish, or because during the day he had become tired out. But when the gardener's whelps challenged him from below, he began to growl in response, faintly and indistinctly at first, then bayed out more loudly as they passed by. Presently the whole place resounded with barking, so the watchman opposite called with a loud cry to the huntsman, asking why his dog was baying so savagely, and whether some mischief was not afoot. The huntsman answered him from the tower that there was nothing to fear, but that his dog had been excited by the lights of the sentries and the din of the bell. This, more than anything else, gave heart to the soldiers of Aratus. They thought that the huntsman was privy to their design, and was trying to conceal it, and that there were many others also in the city who would assist them. However, when the rest of the company essayed the wall, their peril was grievous and protracted, since the ladders shook unless they mounted one by one, and slowly. Moreover, time was pressing, since cocks were already crowing, and directly the people who brought produce from the country to the marketplace would be coming up. Therefore Aratus also mounted the wall in haste, after 40 in all had mounted before him, and when he had been joined by a few more of those below, he went up against the tyrant's house and the praetorium where the mercenary soldiers passed the night, and after falling upon these suddenly, and capturing them all, but killing none, he straightway sent messages to his friends, summoning them all from their homes, and they ran together from all quarters. Day was now breaking, and the theatre was thronged with people who still were in suspense because of the uncertain rumour that prevailed, and in utter ignorance of what was afoot, until the herald came forward and made proclamation that Aratus, son of Cleinias, invited the citizens to secure their freedom. Then, convinced that what they had long expected was come, they rushed in a body to the residence of the tyrant carrying firebrands. A great flame arose as the house caught fire, and was visible as far as Corinth, so that the people of Corinth were astonished, and were on the point of sallying forth to help. Nicocles then slipped out unnoticed by way of certain underground passages, and ran away from the city. And the soldiers, after extinguishing the fire, with the aid of the Sikyonians, plundered his house. Nor did Aratus prevent this, but put the rest of the wealth of the tyrant at the disposition of the citizens. And not a man was killed or even wounded at all, either among the assailants or their enemies, but fortune preserved the enterprise free from the taint of civil bloodshed. Aratus restored 80 exiles who had been banished by Nicocles, and those who fled the city during the reign of former tyrants to the number of 500. These had long been wanderers, yes, for close to 50 years, and now they had come back, most of them in poverty. They laid claim to the property which they had formerly held, and by going to their farms and houses threw Aratus into great perplexity. For he saw that the city was plotted against by outsiders, and eyed with jealously by Antigonus, because it had regained its freedom while it was full of internal disturbances and faction. Wherefore, as things stood, he thought it best to attach the city promptly to the Achaean League, and so, though the people of Sikyon were Dorians, they voluntarily assumed the name and civil polity of the Achaeans, who at that time had neither brilliant repute nor great strength. For they lived in small cities, owned land that was neither fertile nor extensive, and were neighbours to a sea that had no harbours, and for the most part washed a precipitous and rocky shore. But this people, more than any other, showed the world that Greek prowess was invincible whenever it enjoyed good order, harmonious discipline, and a sensible leader. For though they had taken almost no part in the ancient glories of Greece, and at this time, though counted all together, had not the power of a single considerable city, still, owing to their good counsels and their concord, and because they were able, in the place of envying, to obey and follow the one who was preeminent among them for virtue, they not only preserved their own freedom in the midst of so great cities and powers and tyrannies, but were continually saving and setting free very many of the other Greeks.